Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
You are now listening to Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Starting news from New Zealand. New Zealand's newly elected government decided to shut down the Maori Health Authority, Te Aka Waiora, which was established in 2022 to improve the health outcomes of Maori, the indigenous peoples of New Zealand. This decision has sparked protest and legal actions from Maori indigenous peoples. Maori indigenous peoples suffer from significant health inequalities compared to the rest of the population. They have a shorter life expectancy, higher death rates from several diseases, and higher incidence of cancer. Maori leaders believe that Te Aka Waiora is necessary to address these issues and that they are best equipped to design solutions for their communities. They point to the success of Maori health providers in reaching the Maori indigenous population during the COVID-19 pandemic. The government, however, argues that it is working for the well-being of all New Zealanders and that Te Aka Waiora will be incorporated into the national health system. They also claim to be upholding their election promises. The situation remains unresolved, with Maori indigenous peoples continuing their protest and legal challenges. Now moving to Australia. Quote, "Close the gap," unquote, is an Australian government policy aimed at reducing disparities between First Nation people and the rest of the population regarding fundamental elements for happy and healthy life. Since 2008, the Closing the Gap policy has been in effect with 6 targets. In 2016, school attendance was aided, and in 2020, 19 national socio-economic targets were included across 17 areas. There are 7 years left to achieve most goals to ensure equal opportunities for First Nations people and non-Indigenous Australians. 2 targets are on track for 2031, while 4 targets are not on the track. Moving to Tunisia. In a recent news, Google has celebrated the 111th birth anniversary of Taous Auruche, an Algerian-French artist, an amazing icon who devoted her life to making Kabylie poetry more accessible. Born on 4th March 1913 in Tunis, Taous belonged to an Algerian family that converted to Catholicism. Despite her baptismal name being Mary Lucy, Taous was widely known for her immense contribution to the world of literature and art. Taous was deeply passionate about her amazing roots, and her work reflected her dedication to promoting the oral tradition of Kabylie poetry. Traditional Kabylie civilization, which is a sizable Amazigh community in northeastern Algeria, is known for its rich culture of poetry. Taous' life and work continue to inspire people worldwide to connect with their cultural heritage and share it with the world. Now moving to South Africa. On the March 1st, Indigenous Khoi and San peoples from South Africa commemorated the historic Battle of Salt River. Over 500 years ago, Cape Town was already a thriving port and had established trade relations with those sailing the seas. The local indigenous peoples had good relations with the sailors. Therefore, when a fleet of 3 ships led by Portuguese Admiral Francisco de Almeida arrived, it was business as usual. As per the reports, a trade of goods took place and anything went smoothly. A group of people within de Almeida's traveling party attempted to steal the cattle belonging to the indigenous peoples. Their failed attempt did not go unnoticed, and they were driven back to their ships. De Almeida knew that his sailors were in the wrong, but he chose not to hold them accountable for their actions. This leadership decision led to the death of 64 travelers, including De Almeida. This event became known as Battle of Salt River. Now, news from Cambodia. Cambodia's Ministry of Environment is taking action to stop illegal logging and land use in protected areas. They are urging indigenous communities to follow the law on protected areas and for those who have already encroached to return the land. The ministry also says that communities that have signed agreements to protect these areas cannot clear the land for farming or sell it to others. The ministry will also be working with local authorities to increase forest ranger patrols. An indigenous rights group has said that they support the measures, but the ministry should talk to local indigenous peoples before putting them into effect. Folok Pairam, the leader of the Indigenous Peoples Network, emphasizing the importance of involving local communities in discussion beforehand to ensure success, says, quote, "Consulting with these groups who are already actively protecting the environment would significantly improve the effectiveness of both development efforts and protected areas management." Unquote. There are currently 193 protected area communities established in Cambodia, encompassing over 330,000 hectares, involving over 73,000 households. And the ministry is encouraging more participation in ecotourism and tree planting initiatives. News from China. China has 125 million ethnic minorities, making up 9% of its total 125 million population. The government aims to achieve a unified national identity through development programs and promoting Mandarin uses. Critics argue this policy is quote-unquote assimilation that erodes minority cultures and languages through intermarriage and cultural influence. However, critics argue that these policies aim to assimilate minorities into the Han Chinese majority, leading to the erosion of their cultures and languages. China defends its approach, stating that it upholds minority rights by promoting bilingual education, protecting religious freedoms, and granting self-governance to some regions. They argue that balancing national unity with cultural preservation is an ongoing process. Critics dismiss these claims as propaganda and argue that minorities are pressured to assimilate. They believe China prioritizes uniformity over cultural diversity and risks accusations of quote-unquote cultural genocide. China denies these claims and criticizes other countries' treatment of minorities. Now, news from El Salvador. This Friday, dozens of women rallied in El Salvador to express their dissatisfaction with the President Nayib Bukele-led administration and make demands for their rights. The Popular Resistance and Rebellion Bloc is accompanying the feminist movement. A member of the bloc, Sonia Urashia, highlighted, quote, "We also went out to the streets to denounce the different setbacks we have had with the Bukele clans," unquote. She also emphasized that most of the measures implemented by the executive will affect the women of El Salvador. Now, news from Mexico. Organizations, peoples, and collectives in defense of water in multiple geographies of the Mexico called for the 4th National Assembly for Water and Life to be held on March 23 and 24 in the community of La Magdalena, Tlatelolco, Ixtacala. As part of the celebrations for a World Water Day, the call emphasizes that the dispossession of territory and therefore the plundering of water against native peoples and indigenous communities not only happens in the country but globally as part of their capitalist war. In this sense, they emphasizes that although water is an essential element for life, the current water crisis shows that its availability is at the service of industry and millionaires. In particular, they point out the case of the communities of Thalskala host state of next assembly, where they accuse the overexploitation of water wells through the installation of industries and real estate without any type of regulation. Now, news from Paraguay. Indigenous peoples in Paraguay reclaim usurped land from the state. They are demanding full title to the 335 hectares that the government ceded to this community in 1944 for its assistance to the Paraguayan army during the Chaco War against Bolivia. Paraguayan indigenous members of the Maca people demonstrated this Wednesday in Asunción, the country's capital, in order to demand title to the lands on the banks of the Paraguay River, which they consider usurped by the states. As the head of the bridge to be inaugurated in the next few days was built in this place, they gathered in front of the Pantheon of Heroes, from where they left through the street of center of Paraguayan capital towards the headquarters of the National Institute of Rural and Land Development. Cacique Mateo Martinez, Mateico Sole, leader of Maca people, warned that for this construction, quote, there was no consultation process, unquote, nor did his people give their quote-unquote consent. Now in Peru. In Peru, there was attack against home of Peruvian indigenous leader. During the early hours of Wednesday morning, there was an attack against the home of Jessica Chamajen, leader of Tuntanin Communal Reserve and member of Aujun indigenous peoples in the Amazon River of Peru. The attack occurred one day after an interdiction operation against illegal mining was carried out in that Peruvian region. Fortunately, Jessica Samajian was not injured during the attack. However, state entities such as Ministry of Environment and National Service of Natural Areas Protected by the state condemned the attack. Similarly, in Panama, government's inactions on mine closure in Panama denounced. Panamanian environmentalists denounced the inaction of the Panamanian government in executing the closure process of the copper mine operated by Minera Panama, a subsidiary of the Canadian company First Quantum Minerals. The mine has been closed down since last November, when the East Main country's justice system declared the contract that guaranteed the renewal of its concession, quote-unquote, unconstitutional. According to the environmentalist, the Panamanian government has failed to comply with mine closure plan, putting the area at serious risk and increasing the Central American country's vulnerability to international arbitration. The environmental groups indicated in the press release that on quote-unquote March 7, the project's environmental performance bond coverage will expire, consigned for closure, post-closure, and unforeseen causes for the value of $108 million. But the instructions and resolutions to demand the bond have not yet been published. That is all for this edition of Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. For more information on the rights of indigenous peoples, visit ces.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook and Twitter.